Welcome, this is a recorded session of the Post-Quantum Cryptography Conference of the PKI Consortium. This conference would not have been possible without our sponsors, PQ Shield, SSL.com, Entrust, Keyfactor, HID Global, and the organizational support of the Post-Quantum Cryptography Working Group of the PKI Consortium, and in particular, Entrust, Keyfactor, and Logius. Would you like to join the PKI Consortium? Go to pkic.org/join, or contact us if you would like to become a sponsor.
All right, thank you, folks. Up next is curriculum development for post-quantum workforce development programs with Jose Hernandez Perez. Jose likes to bridge the gap between emerging technologies and education, bringing quantum computing concepts to students across all career stages. His unique background in both digital studies and history provides a comprehensive perspective on technology's evolution.
Thank you so much for the intro. So kind. Hello, everybody. Let's give a minute there with the slides. Oh, perfect. Sounds good. So, do I use the remote or you guys? All good? Right there. Yeah. There we go. Perfect then. There we go. Okay. Hello, everyone. As I said, my name is Jose Hernandez. It's a pleasure to be with you all here today. It's been an honor to hear all the presentations the last day and a half, and I've learned a lot being here with you all. So as we said, my bad. As we said, I work in education. I work at Florida State University and the University of Puerto Rico, where I focus on teaching emerging technologies throughout all levels, all the way from bachelor's to PhD. And outside, I work with different businesses, specifically in the financial realm, that are looking to learn about post-quantum cryptography and other emerging technologies such as quantum computing that may help their tracks. My background is more in high-performance computing, and that's where I came into this world. But I'm happy to share this presentation that will go through a couple sample curriculums, and we'll also talk about the elements that we need to keep in mind when developing education programs, be it for you, for your team, your staff, or your enterprise, okay? Or your clients, for that matter. Okay, so seeing that, I want to start here first. As I said, I'm an educator first. General education, when we're in kindergarten all the way through maybe 12th grade, right? 18-year-olds for those across the pond that call it differently, focuses on creating a context frame, right? It focuses on creating a way for you to see the world and ask questions. Right? When you get into workforce, your world is pretty much defined. By that I mean is that you have the context of your lived experiences to whatever place in your career you are. You have the context of your team, what it's trying to achieve, and also of the company or enterprise that you may be in at the moment. Right? All of that forms a context and a frame of reference that we need to keep in mind. Therefore, workforce training is about skill development. We pick one thing or two things that we really want to change and we really want to impact in that staff member or that person, right? If we try to take too much at a time, it can lead to a lot of setbacks on the road to creating effective curriculums, okay? So for the next few slides, we'll actually be talking just about workforce, specifically for post-quantum. So in post-quantum, there are 4 areas that I like to keep in mind. Ooh, that worked. Nice. My bad. So we have these 4 areas that I like to think about. And the first one is integrating the ecosystem that you're in, right? And that specifically is the international and national standards that are currently developing in PQC, right? And we've talked about this a lot in the last day and a half, so I'm not really gonna put a lot of emphasis into it, just to keep in mind that if you're developing a curriculum, you cannot be ignorant of the standards coming out, right? So that's point number 1. Second is current vendors, and that can be defined as the vendors you work with, right? And the ones that you need to be familiar with, or the vendors that are out there that you want to integrate. And those can all change the way you do the curriculum. If you want to introduce a new tool or a new vendor, that could take a significant chunk of the workforce development program that you're doing, right? And when you have limited time, and we'll go into time aspects in just a little bit, it may be very important to pick what vendors work for you, okay? Now, having said that, the next step goes into the team aspect, or your thinking at the enterprise level, right? We have costs. Obviously, not everybody's a fan of training. I am, because that's what I do, but a lot of people do hiring as well. But when we're dealing with emerging technologies, many a time you need to do a mix of both. And there's many combinations, right? I can hire a really knowledgeable manager in that specific technology, and they can subtrain who's below them. That's one way. I can hire somebody and put them inside a team and see if that knowledge perfuses without me doing anything, right? Or I can go ahead and train a whole team from scratch and bring external people in. Those are all valid answers, and it really depends on what you want to pick, right? In addition to costs of training versus hiring, we have personnel responsibilities. How much of my team actually works with PQC, right? How much of my team actually needs to be retrained or needs to know how to evaluate PQC vendors and what's out there, right? And this is for each individual enterprise to discover what's there, right? Lastly, once we have team composition and we know what we're trying to do, we go into rewarding that team, right? So if they've been with you for a number of decades or years, okay, my bad. Yeah, I got excited, y'all. My bad. Okay, so if the team has been with you for a number of years, you're going to want to reward that loyalty. And here we go into a very important aspect, which is trust, right? Internal and external trust can be a very big thing, particularly in the cybersecurity world. If you want to open up your code base for an external consultant to go ahead and do the changes they want to do, that's your decision, right? But many a time, we want the software architects and the software developers that have dedicated their time and joy into your code bases. We want them to be able to do the work, right? And that's where training comes in, and it gives people the tools to stay ahead on their jobs and do what they need to do, okay? So that's that part of rewarding. And lastly, we talk about putting it in the context of what you're trying to do. So here we go again into where are you in your transition stage for the post-quantum cryptography world. And that can be anything from we're trying to see what is this PCQ thing from what happened yesterday. And then you can also be thinking about maybe where your systems fit in, what needs to change, right? And what is high priority. And this is where our existing conversations onto a software bill of materials and a cryptographic bill of materials fit in. Okay? So then as we keep those in mind, now we can see an actual curriculum. So for context, before I show you this one, it was made for a bank that was trying to think through its possible curriculum for its cybersecurity professionals, right? And this was the sample curriculum we came to. It's 6.5 months of 2-hour sessions a week, okay? And I wanted to give you this sample one so we can talk through actual problems and implementations, right? So in that first month and a half, we have 12 2-hour sessions, 24 hours of work. So that means that 10% of that staff's, if we're working a normal 40-hour job, 10% of that staff's time is going towards education. So that means one thing, it has to be very well done, and we cannot be wasting time, right? And number two, it has to be applicable once they finish that curriculum, okay? So let's see these 3 courses. The first one, we said Introduction to Quantum Computing, very generally, what it is, why is RSA broken with Shores, right? Really, what is lattice-based cryptography? Here's where we cover all this theoretical stuff, right? And that's why we go really heavy on what we call theory-based learning, okay? Now, when we get to that second one, we want to focus on project-based or practice-based learning. Either one works, right? And we call implementing post-quantum cryptographic standards. And this does not mean that they get to maybe play with production. No. This means we create and test environments for them to actually learn hands-on what we're trying to do. It may be some tutorials into OpenSSH, OpenSSL, maybe certificate signing, right? But here's where we're going to spend a lot of time when we're working with cybersecurity professionals that are going to do hands-on work as you go forward in your enterprise. Now, the last one, and I think it's one of the most important things, is the long-term strategy module, right? Why? Because if you don't have a long-term strategy plan at the end of it, you can go through 6 months of instruction and it can leave right out the other year of that team member or that whole team that you just spent 6 months giving workforce development to, right? So we want to make sure that in that last 2 months, we dedicate significant amount in the classroom to creating a plan to either that second generation of training, right? Or to create a plan to bring more people in, or do more of that implementing on a different level. Maybe start a pilot project that may take over a specific amount of time in that person's workforce, okay? So that's what we like to think about. And obviously the time frames can change, the way we structure it can change, but I like this structure of theory, practical, long-term, okay? And that's why I wanted to show you this in a minute. Now, having gone through curriculum, we have to think, where is the content coming from? Because there's not that much out there to build curriculums from. And here we go to the 3 main areas that are putting content out there that you can draw from. And I put a couple names up there that just do some type of, that have materials out there, right? And on this corner, we have industry, right? You have companies like IBM, Cureka, Quantify. Some of these have open source educational content. Some of them have customizable content that you can pay for, right? And tailor for your institution's needs. We also have open source materials like Open Quantum Safe. I'm sure everybody's familiar, and they have a great collection of OQS demos, right, for curl, Apache HTTPD, and it's just amazing the collection that they have there, and they're maintaining on a solid basis. And then we have educational institutions like the University of Rhode Island and the University of Maryland, right? So both of these institutions actually have solid graduate certificates in quantum computing, but it depends on your needs. If you want to go back to school, right? Or if you want to send people back to school, it's not always the most flexible choice, right? And building these curriculums in your own enterprise becomes kind of the goal at times, so you can bring them in, okay? So, the next one, right, is that we're going to go back to the curriculum, and we're going to take out the long-term strategy to just talk about the content. As we said, the last one is mostly forward-looking. So in the first 2, I said the first one is theory, the second one is practice. So using the resources we saw in the last one, how do we integrate them in, right? And this is just me picking and choosing stuff, not meant to be an end-all be-all. It's just how I did this one, okay? So for theoretical resources, we can pick parts of the Practical Introduction to Quantum Safe Cryptography from IBM and Cureka's Quantum Communication and PQC. It begs to differ that here I'm denoting practical as not hands-on, but applicable to my goals and my enterprise, right? So if I'm going to the practical resources, I'm going to pick the open quantum safe demos that apply to me. If I don't do any work with curl, right, and none of my developers do any work with curl, why would I teach the curl demo? Okay, are we good there? And that's a very good point of picking and choosing what works for you. And then IBM's quantum safe tutorials are out there as well, and they have solid tutorials on OpenSSL, OpenSSH, Edmunds DSA, right? But they have to be tailored for each specific theme. And here's where we talk about selection of personnel. And this is a very big question, specifically for financial institutions that are looking to shift into PQC. Many a time they need to train some part of their team, not their whole team. So how do they pick, right? And this is the main question that we get a lot. And these are the 3 strategies that we've come up with, but they're not the only ones. It's just 3 that are there, right? The first one is the top-down approach. This is pretty straightforward. I pick managers of the appropriate teams, right? I train the managers, and then the second generation becomes whoever the manager picks, okay? Pretty straightforward, not a lot of nitpicking, not a lot of thinking or surveys or stuff to do here. The second one is if I'm already doing an inventory of algorithms, right? Or a C-bomb or an S-bomb, whatever terminology you want to get into, right? The person who's doing that inventory and the people who work with those specific algorithms get selected first, right? But this depends on where you are on your transition, of course. If you're not doing a C-bomb or an S-bomb at the moment, then it's not going to be applicable to try to get both done at the same time, right? The last one is what I call the collective approach, and it works really well for companies or groups that know that they're going to do more than one generation of training. Why? Because in the collective approach, we pick people all the way from upper high-level management to junior developers, right? And we try to get representative of the whole corporation and try to get PQC as a conversation starter, right? But if you're going to do this, you got to be really sure that a second generation is coming, because a lot of the people who were in that first generation are not going to be hands-on, okay? So that's a pretty important point there, because you don't want, if you do not know that you have a second generation incoming, then you don't want to, I don't want to say waste the time, but if they're not going to be hands-on, then you need to significantly upheaval of that curriculum, right? Does that make sense there? Okay, so these are the strategies that we do for personnel selection. And having covered the what and the who, there's one more aspect that I want to cover, and it's what collaboration can be done. And this specifically for this specific group, but it may lead you to think about other opportunities for collaboration in a single enterprise. And in this case, we decided to combine the modules for security professionals with the modules for the investment professionals at the same company, right? Because they were starting to think about what was possible with quantum modeling, quantum simulation for portfolio optimization, et cetera, but I'm not going to get into all that. So we decided to combine the first module, right, make it applicable across both fields, and then separate on the second module, right? So your security professionals keep on going with what we need to do, right? And they keep going with what's best for them, which may be quantum-inspired algorithms, which are getting a huge kick right now, specifically with the Toshiba advances on high-frequency trading. And then they go into maybe some quantum algorithm development. But the security professionals stay with their long-term strategy and really practical hands-on labs. But the way this also helps companies think, oh, maybe this applies to more people than I was thinking, right? And this is the same case that may work outside of the finance world for other use cases, okay? So it's not just limited to security and investment professionals, one next to each other. Now, if you can, please scan this code. No rush. There's two things there. There's a catalog of all the educational resources that I mentioned. It includes the QuantFis, the IBM ones, the OQS demos. They're all there. And then right next to it, it's an interactive exercise. So you can click on it, and it'll ask you a bunch of questions. And hopefully, we've talked a little bit about curriculum development today. So try to think of a possible team, maybe your team, maybe yourself, maybe a client that you're working with that you want to educate on PQC, and go ahead and fill the questions out, right? As you do that, I'll be talking about, did everybody scan it? Can I move? We're good? Okay, solid. So these are some of the questions that are in there, but most of them is to guide you into thinking the three big areas of curriculum development: the who, the what, and the how. And here we talk about who in terms of who is being trained, who is doing the training, right? That can be internal or external to your enterprise. We're talking about who keeps track of the curriculum. This is very important. Surveys are a thing in education. They're always there, and they're always pestering you at the end of courses, but you need to take them so we can make them better, okay? And then somebody has to keep track of that and change the curriculum. Then the what is what resources I'm using, what data do I want to keep, what stage am I in, right? Those are all the whats. And the how, there's not much of a question. Project-based learning is the way to go, right? We want applicability is king in curriculums and education, specifically in a field where on-the-job training is needed, right? We don't want to, so that's PBL is a focus that you gotta have. And then the only other how is, do I involve my human resources department and my or do I do external portals, right? Because most of your workforce development today may be through HR or LinkedIn Learning or some other platform that may not support this PQC internal training that you want to do. So those are conversations you need to have with your team. And yeah, if you are filling that out, you'll get a copy on your email of the answers you gave, and hopefully that will give you a starting point for educating in your team or your client's team or yourself. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jose. Any questions from the audience? We'd like to take a few questions from the audience before we turn to any questions online.
Jaime is trying to kill me. Quick question on the project-based learning. Could you talk a little bit more about how you enable that or how you would see that being enabled?
Of course. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, the demos are a great place to start. But I think the best way to think about, particularly the project-based learning stuff, is to be able to take tutorials that are already out there and repurpose them for the stuff you need, right? So there's IBM has a tutorial on web application development, and it joins 2 of their past tutorials, right? So the best idea is to start with really small building blocks, right? Start with the smallest unit that you have, build a project there. Give them an easy win. Not saying this is easy at all. Pick the easier win, I would say, and try to get that project done in that class time that you have, and that may inspire that team to try to take on bigger projects, right? But the way to set it up, I would say it's groups, big thing, group, not try to give it as an individual assignment, and try to get them to collaborate in and outside your classroom time. So as a possible like work task or pilot project, etc. Yeah, hope that answered the question.
Go ahead.
I have a quick question. So, do you see, there is the project, and you do a project-based learning, and then you finish the course, and then do you consider proof of concepts and hackathon parts of the training, or is it part that comes after the learning phase?
Yeah, I would consider hackathons particularly an early part of the training. I wouldn't put like in terms of like when you would get started. I would consider part of that the hands-on labs and all that activities. And then what was the other one you said? You said hackathons and
a proof of concept. So,
And, yeah,
for example, you do your learning, and then as a sort of final project, you take up a use case of your organization, and then you try to migrate that specific use case.
Yes. So I would say that's a great starting point. I would just say that most likely if you created a workforce development program, that proof of concept will blow right past the deadline that you have. Or maybe because if this is their first exposure to PQC, they may not be able to really judge how much it takes them to actually do the thing that they're setting out to do, right? So it's better more as like instructor given, but if they're inspired, then they can keep on rolling post.
So it's like a homework after the course then.
Got it.
Go ahead.
Would vocational or trade school style training work instead of just on-the-job training for people who may want to get into the field but don't have the job?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. We've actually had, as I said, my background is high-performance computing. We're actually seeing great success with community colleges in vocational trainings, particularly in Southern California, with certain schools doing the same programs you're talking about, data analysis, but on high-performance big computers, and actually one of the NSF computers donated time, and they were able to get significant good students like out the pipeline and into jobs at the federal and local level. So I think it's a great opportunity. I think it requires a lot of funding and support, not only of different institutions, but the educational institutions themselves, because students may not have the time or the connections to be able to create those programs. So it definitely has to be like a top-down initiative to get it done. But I agree. It would be a great idea. Yeah.
And some of us couldn't scan the QR code, so if you could put it up again.
Oh, definitely. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
No. Sorry to bother you back there again. But thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a good rest of your conference.
Thanks, sir.